what the crisis shows is the need to get business journalism out of the ghetto that it particularly tends to be in television, where it's kind of put aside, and get it into the main news bulletins. I think this is crucial if we are going to have an informed debate among the public, and given that there are very big changes happening in the economy and in policy, we really do have to have that informed debate, the same way that really we need the press to have any informed political debate. So I think it's crucial that we do find ways of keeping this debate in the mainstream media, in television, and if it takes innovative ways to do it, we have to do that. But I think if we lose that space, if it just becomes a very specialist thing and, you know, debate among bloggers and the financial press, we're going to lose, you know, the public and a very important part of this whole debate, which is crucial given that what we're going through is a very big and important transition in the economic system and in our whole paradigm of how to understand it.
It's about making it relevant. I think that's the key thing. Damien.
Well, you know, to a certain extent, I have to say I beg to differ. You know, dress up a story, make it entertaining, trivialize it, fine. That's one part of it. But I think there's something else, which is, yes, you could point back in history to individual journalists that got it and individual stories. But that doesn't stop an analysis like the work Dean's done, and the analysis that was referred to from the American Journalism Review from 2001, finding that if you take coverage as a whole, what you find is that tends to be asymmetrical, as Wolfgang's pointing out. It tends to be more boosterist than it is doom and gloom, and it tends, taken as a whole, not to take into account those stories, you know, those positions like Gillian Tett's. And I wonder, coming from the outside, never having been on a news desk, if these two people here, or these three people here, can say something about the interaction that goes on between journalists who are recovering these issues. Because very often when I speak to journalists, they say, well, we just report what people say. We don't form a view. Now, I think that's a cop-out. I think that's a complete cop-out. And presumably, you are discussing these things, you are forming a view, and you know, either individual markets or the market as a whole, you can call the top, and you can develop a position on that. But that doesn't seem to have happened.
Yeah. Journalists want to get on the front page. That's what they want. That's what they're not going to do. Now, if you look about the Daily Mail, for example. Now, the Daily Mail, I worked for the Times before I joined the FT in the 90s. And the way it works on those newspapers is that, I mean, to get on the front page, this is what every young aspiring journalist wants, you need to be basically in the mold of the paper's editor and front bench and the themes it supports at the moment. Now, the Daily Mail will support the theme that the economy is bad, and it will support that theme until May next year. And from June next year, it will support the theme, provided the election goes the way we think it goes, that the economy is great. And if you, as a financial journalist, go against that kind of, you know, theme that the editorial board of that newspaper will support, it's going to be very difficult. So that's why you get these journalists being sort of follow sort of the herd instincts there. Now, on the television, I don't think the BBC did a bad job. My former colleague Robert Peston, if I recall, I mean, he almost single-handedly caused a bank run in the UK. So I mean, I think that, you know, there was some reporting in the UK. In other countries, that was different. I mean, in Germany, I recall that the television didn't really understand what was going on, and it was then very convenient when they could portray it as a story of greed and bonus payments. This is something they could understand and could convey, but they couldn't understand. They didn't understand some of the more intricate and more important details of, you know, credit default swaps regulation, which is still not properly understood by many people, and how crucial it is to the crisis that we have. So I think that we need to. It's going to be very difficult to get the middle ground. And Bird and Fortune, by the way, is very, very funny. But let's make no mistake, it's no journalism.
Yeah.
It really is no journalism. Now, the FT had the other day they had a Bird and Fortune actually on its front page, and you could click the video. This was one of those collaborative ventures. It was very, very funny, really funny. But you've got to be clear about what the limits of what we're talking here. And in the end, you can always watch it on YouTube All these things that you're talking about.
Right.
Yeah, but it isn't yet. I know it
Juliana,
is something for the middle, but it isn't journalism. That's
I want
the
to come
point.
over to
it
Steve.
doesn't
'Cause-
tell you what
yeah.
happened. It tells you a wonderfully funny fictional
Yeah.
story of what could have happened. That's the difference, I think.
And there's no argument, I think, saying that we've got a new generation of people who have grown up on television and they're just, they're not as intellectual. There's plenty of younger people who actually need the information. And I don't think we can trivialize. It's great to watch Jon Stewart. It's great to watch all of these. But the content is not there. You know, you've got the headlines, and you maybe, if you're interested, then might dig deeper. But I really don't think we should advocate that. I want to come back on the television side to you, Steve, particularly, and looking at this, and we talked a bit, too, about this over lunchtime, about, everybody wants the lead story. It's similar to the front page. And in television, it does tend to be, if it bleeds, it leads. And the story with the biggest, I think, impact is going to be what the leading story is going to be. I think that's what we see time and time again. What's that dialogue that goes on in television?
I mean, the thing about television is you have even less time, you have even less space in the front page. So the competition to get in the bulletin, which has maybe 6 or 7 items, is even more intense. And the competition, particularly among, Robert Peston versus our, Nick Robertson, our political editor, is particularly intense. So I think the issue is to be able to explain the crisis in both a comprehensive way and a way that's accessible in, 2 or 3 minute report is a difficult and challenging task, but I think one which we have to do, not to trivialize it, but to try to explain it. What I think has happened at the BBC is because of this crisis is that editors have become more responsive to the idea that economic news might be important. And whereas there's a famous case a number of years ago where television decided there was no point in covering the AOL takeover of Time Warner because this was in the US, and they decided to do it 3 days later because they didn't think anyone would have noticed. And we had a huge row. The online service did it the same, the moment it happened. Television did it 3 days later and thought that was fine. So things have changed a bit because of this crisis. Stories are getting on that weren't getting on. But inevitably, in this crisis, and as it's now becoming, as you rightly say, a big political story as well, how bad the economy is part of the political debate. There's a pressure to turn this into a political debate and a political story rather than an economic story. And I think the classic example was the G20 summit, which was, if anything, an economic summit, was led on the BBC News by Nick Robinson, who saw it as his role to explain what SDRs were, taking clips from our economics correspondent and turning it around. So I think there is going to be this fight, and this is, sort of what happens in television journalism. But, I think we have seen a bit of a change in the mentality of editors as a result of this crisis, and that's an encouraging thing. The problem is the average age of the viewers of BBC television is the same as the average age of, your viewers of Deutsche. They're 59 to 60. It's reaching the other group, the under 35s. And that's where I think it is true that the internet, not necessarily blogs, but different ways of delivering the same story through the internet, through YouTube, not necessarily not using the mainstream media, but using it in a different way is very important. That's why I say it's not the medium that we should be looking at so much. It's not whether we're going to have rotary presses sending out, newspapers by truck. It's how we're going to deliver that content in different ways that's so important to reach the new audience. What we have to find a way of is not skimping on the actual content.
Yes. Dean wants to come in here.
Yeah, I think those are great points. I just want to reemphasize what a great question this is because it seems to be central. Because the deal is that it strikes me that it's very important for us as journalists to give public opinion a fighting chance to become players in the financial system and in the financial debate. Over the last, once upon a time, the Wall Street's effect on Main Street was largely indirect. If you didn't know, a few people own stock, even if you did, it's not your life savings. This is a case where Wall Street's connection to the broad economy is immediate and indirect in almost the tissue paper thin way. It's practically a direct connection.